Hi, I am Aurel Enriquez, and this presentation contains our discussion on the reproductive system. Because of the reproductive system, the human species has continued to exist since 300,000 years ago. The reproductive system is also responsible for the differences in the physical appearances and functional differences between males and females, and can also influence their difference in behavior. Keep in mind, though, that compared to other organ systems, the reproductive system isn't really that necessary for survival as an individual. Ikumpara po natin ito sa cardiovascular system. You could die if your heart loses blood supply. Compared to the nervous system, you definitely will not be able to perform normal human functions if there are parts of your brain that's missing. But there are people out there that due to medical or health concerns ay wala na, or they've already had parts of their reproductive system removed and they're perfectly fine. Okay? So they're living normal lives at hindi po apektado yung day-to-day activities nila. So again, the reproductive system is necessary for human survival as a species, but not actually necessary for individual survival. Listed here are the functions of the reproductive system, and i-discuss din po natin lahat ng ito as we proceed. This slide shows an illustration of the major reproductive organs for both males and females. Let's now talk about the formation of gametes. Gametes are the reproductive cells, which in males, they are known as the sperm, and for females, it's the oocytes or egg cells. Meiosis is a different type of cell division that would create the gametes. So, kung yung lahat po ng ibang cells natin, they are created through mitosis, ang mga gametes naman po, they are created through a different process called meiosis. Take note that each sperm cell and egg cell has exactly 23 chromosomes. Here are some other terminologies that we need to remember. Fertilization is when the sperm cell and oocyte unite, which happens after one of the sperm cells swims and successfully reaches the egg cell with the help of its tail or flagella. A zygote is what becomes of an oocyte once it has been fertilized. Within 3 to 14 days after fertilization, this zygote then develops to become an embryo. Let's now begin to discuss the male reproductive system. The male reproductive system consists of the testes, epididymis, ductus deferens, and the urethra. Accessory glands include the seminal vesicles, prostate glands, and bulbourethral glands. Supporting structures include the scrotum and penis. We'll be discussing the functions of all these structures as we proceed to the next slides. This slide shows us an illustration of all the structures mentioned earlier. The scrotum encloses the testes, which also is where the dartos muscle is located. The dartos muscle involuntarily moves the scrotum and testes either closer or away from the body, depending on the temperature. So, for example, when it's too warm, the dartos muscle automatically moves the scrotum a little bit away from the body, but when it's too cold, the dartos muscle moves the scrotum closer. But why does this happen? Why is this necessary? This has something to do with sperm development. The sperm cells usually develop at temperatures that's slightly below normal body temperature. So ano nga po ulit yung normal range of body temperature for humans? It's 35 to 37 degrees Celsius. So it says here that sperm cells develop at temperatures that maybe are like 1 to 2 degrees or a bit less than normal. So hindi po mag-isa ang dartos muscle sa trabaho niya dito. Human males also have the cremaster muscles, which are extensions of the abdominal muscles that can contract to pull the testes closer to the body. The testes is the primary male organ because this structure is responsible for producing sperm. As previously discussed earlier, the testes is located inside of the scrotum. The specific location inside of the testes where sperm is produced is within the seminiferous tubules. Okay, ulitin po natin, ang sperm cells, they are produced inside of the seminiferous tubules. The seminiferous tubules are structures inside of the testes, and the testes are located inside of the scrotum. Let's now discuss the cells found within the testes. Interstitial cells secrete the hormone testosterone, which, if you watch our previous discussion on the endocrine system, testosterone is necessary in sperm production and development of the reproductive organs. Germ cells are the cells that sperm cells arise from. So, bago daw po maging sperm cell ang isang sperm, it first started out as a germ cell. Sustentacular cells nourish the germ cells and could also produce hormones. So basically, ang mga sustentacular cells daw po, they're the ones taking care of the germ cells until those germ cells grow up and become sperm cells. Spermatogenesis is the formation of sperm cells, and this begins in males during puberty. This would happen as the interstitial cells increase in size and number, causing the seminiferous tubules to enlarge. After that, the seminiferous tubules start producing both the germ cells and sustentacular cells. Now, the sustentacular cells would take care or nourish the germ cells. Alright, so ulitin po natin, no, sa seminiferous tubules, simulan na po yung pag-produce ng germ cells and sustentacular cells. Yung sustentacular cells po, kumbaga, no, in simpler terms, sa alagaan nila yung germ cells until eventually yung mga germ cells po, they would evolve into sperm cells. So I hope by now malinaw na po sa inyo yung process na yun. Here's a step-by-step list on how germ cells eventually become sperm cells. May ibang mga step pa po kasi yun in between. So starting out as germ cells, they become spermatogonia, which are just undifferentiated male germ cells. Then they become primary spermatocytes and then secondary spermatocytes. After that, the spermatocytes become spermatids. And then after pa lang po nito, tsaka lang sila magiging sperm cells. This step-by-step process is how meiosis happens in males and is depicted in this illustration to the right. A sperm cell is divided into three segments: the head, midpiece, and tail. The head is further divided into three structures: the acrosome, which is seen at the tip or at the very end of the head. The middle is the nucleus, which occupies most of the head, and at the bottom of that is the centriole. The midpiece is filled with mitochondria, and the tail is the sperm's flagella, which would help it swim and reach the oocyte once it enters a female. The epididymis are thread-like tubes on each side of the testes. The seminiferous tubules are connected to the epididymis, and this is where they move the newly produced sperm cells. So ulitin po natin, germ cells that are located inside of the seminiferous tubules undergo meiosis to eventually become sperm cells. Pag yung mga germ cells po, naging sperm cells na sila, aalis na sila ng seminiferous tubules and lilipat na po sila to the epididymis. At the epididymis, the sperm cells continue to mature and develop the ability to swim and attach to oocytes. Again, oocytes are the egg cells for females. This slide shows us an illustration of all the previously discussed structures and their locations. The ductus deferens is also known as the vas deferens. This is a structure that connects the epididymis and the seminal vesicles. In males that have undergone vasectomy, this is where the cut would be made so that the sperm cells would no longer be able to exit, hence leading to a permanent form of male contraception or sterilization. Alright, so ulitin po natin, the ductus deferens is also known as the vas deferens. So again, this is the specific portion that is being cut in cases of vasectomy. The seminal vesicle is a sac-shaped gland connected to the ductus deferens. The seminal vesicle and the ductus deferens are two different structures that eventually join at the prostate gland, creating another structure called the ejaculatory duct. This ejaculatory duct enters the prostate gland and connects to the urethra. In males, the urethra is a passageway for both urine and fluids from the reproductive system. The penis is divided into three columns of erectile tissue: the corpus cavernosum, corpus spongiosum, and the spongy urethra. These three columns can fill up with blood to produce an erection. The penis is only considered as a supporting structure to the reproductive system, and it functions to transfer sperm from the male to the female. This is also the same structure where urine passes through, because the urethra is located inside of the penis. And as mentioned earlier, for males, the urethra is the same passageway for both urine and male reproductive fluids. The distal end of the penis, sa pinakadulo po, there is a cap-like structure, which is called the glans penis. From there, the urethra opens to the outside as the external urethral orifice. This slide shows an illustration of all the previously discussed structures and their locations. The prostate gland is a structure that's usually just the size of a walnut. Again, Americans will use anything but the metric system. In terms of location, the prostate gland surrounds the urethra. The bulbourethral gland is located near the base. Nasa ilalim daw po ng prostate gland yung bulbourethral gland, and this is responsible for secreting mucus. This slide again shows us an illustration of all the previously discussed structures and their locations. The semen is a mixture of sperm and secretions from the glands that we just discussed earlier. These secretions provide a transport medium to protect the sperm and nutrients to activate the sperm. The seminal vesicles provide fructose, which serves as a carbohydrate and energy source for each sperm cells. The seminal vesicles are also the source of prostaglandins. Prostaglandins decrease mucous thickness around the cervix and uterine tubes, so that would be easier for the sperm to swim through the female reproductive tract. The prostate gland contains enzymes to liquefy semen after it has entered the female reproductive tract, which again is necessary so that the sperm cells could swim easily. The enzymes from the prostate gland also neutralizes the acidic pH of the vagina, so it doesn't kill the sperm cells. Now, people might be asking, bakit po acidic yung pH ng vagina? This mildly acidic pH of the vagina is necessary to kill infectious bacteria or other pathogens. So, hindi rin po pwede na neutral lang palagi yung vaginal pH, because the acidic part, or this acidic pH is part of its first line of defense against infections. Okay, so that's the purpose of the enzymes from the prostate gland. It temporarily neutralizes the vaginal pH for the survival of the sperm cells. Next is the bulbourethral gland. Its secretions has the same function. It neutralizes the acidic pH. Dito po ang mahalaga lang na kailangan nating tandaan ay ang lifespan ng sperm cells as soon as it has entered the female reproductive tract. Sperm cells can live for 72 hours once it is inside a female. Just a recap, sperm cells develop in the seminiferous tubules located inside of the testes. They start out as germ cells, but after meiosis, they move to the epididymis to mature. Next, these mature sperm cells now pass through the ductus deferens and mix with the enzymes and mucus produced by the glands listed here. After that, during ejaculation, this mixture is now called semen. So the semen would exit the person through the urethra. The gonadotropin-releasing hormone is produced in the hypothalamus, which stimulates the secretion of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. Ulitin po natin, the hypothalamus would produce GnRH, or the gonadotropin-releasing hormone. GnRH would then stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to produce the luteinizing hormone and the follicle-stimulating hormone. The luteinizing hormone would then stimulate the secretion of testosterone from the testes. Meanwhile, the FSH would start the process of producing new sperm cells. This process is referred to as spermatogenesis. And again, this is prompted by the follicle-stimulating hormone. Okay, ulitin po natin yun. Yung follicle-stimulating hormone po, no, ang production nito, yun po yung nagsisimula ng process na spermatogenesis. For males, the major hormone responsible for the changes and development that they go through during puberty is testosterone. Again, testosterone is produced specifically by the interstitial cells of the testes. For human males, puberty begins at the age of 12 to 14 years old and ends when they're about 18 years old. Nabanggit na po natin ito on the previous slides. Testosterone is produced specifically by the interstitial cells of the testes. Testosterone is important for the proper development and maintenance of the male reproductive organs. There's just one other hormone that is produced within the testes, specifically along the seminiferous tubules, and that is inhibin. Inhibin would inhibit FSH production once enough has been produced or after FSH has successfully done its job, and sort of like a negative feedback mechanism. Let's now proceed to discuss the female reproductive system. Listed here are its components, which again, i-discuss po natin lahat as we proceed. With regards to its location, these could be found within the pelvis, between the urinary bladder and the rectum, except the mammary glands, which are located within the female's breast. Those organs located in the pelvis are held in place by ligaments, so they don't move around or get dislocated as we do our day-to-day activities. Females have what is called as a broad ligament that spreads out to both sides of the uterus and attaches to the ovaries and uterine tubes. This illustration shows us the previously mentioned organs in their proper location. If you belong to my lab classes, alam niyo na po kasama ito sa dapat na aralin ng mga illustrations in preparation for the upcoming exams. This illustration shows us all the other structures that we will be discussing in the following slides. The ovaries are the primary female reproductive organ. Just to recall, for males, what is the primary reproductive organ? It's the testes. Okay, so ulitin po natin. Primary reproductive organs for males, it's the testes, but for females, it's the ovaries. Now again, for females, the ovaries are the primary reproductive organs, and the ovaries is where both the oocytes and sex hormones are produced. Normally, every female human has one on either side of their uterus, so that's a total of 2 ovaries per female person. The ovaries are attached to the uterus through the ovarian ligaments. Females also have suspensory ligaments, which would anchor the ovaries to the pelvic cavity. And lastly, females also have the mesovarium, which attaches the ovaries to the broad ligament. So basically, all of these ligaments are there to keep all of the female reproductive organs in their correct places. The ovarian follicle are groups of cells in the ovaries that contain egg cells or oocytes. Each of the ovarian follicles contain an oocyte. So for males, if the reproductive cell is the sperm, for females, their reproductive cell is the oocyte. Okay, ulitin po natin, no? Yung main cell that is responsible for reproduction for males, it's the sperm cells. For females, the cell that's mainly responsible for reproduction is the oocytes. This illustration shows us the contents of the ovaries. Oogenesis is the process of gamete production in females. Again, if oogenesis happens for females, ano naman po ang version nito for males? Spermatogenesis. Alright, ulitin po natin. Sperm production in males is spermatogenesis. If oocyte production in females naman po ang tinatanong, then it's referred to as oogenesis. Okay? So, ayan po. Next, in comparison to males na nagsisimula lang po yung spermatogenesis sa kanila during puberty, for females, oogenesis starts even before a child is born. Alright? So, oocytes start off as oogonia. Okay? I-rewind lang po natin ulit, no? If for females, oocytes start out as oogonia, for males, ano naman po ang starting version ng mga sperm cells? For male, sperm cells start out as germ cells. Alright? So, ayan po, no? If we have chapters or topics that are this long and ganito karami yung kailangan nating aralin, one of my techniques is to kind of like make a side-by-side comparison between the two different topics. So, in this case, side-by-side comparison of the male reproductive system and female reproductive system. Mas madali po kasing tandaan kapag ginagawa nyo sila ng points of comparison instead of just trying to remember them as they are. So, ayun po. That's why as we continue with our discussion, I always have a recall time, or I always have a comparison, for males, kung ganito yung ganyan. For females, ano naman yung ganito. So, ayun po. I will always be kind of like having that sort of discussion style as we proceed with our discussion. Okay? So, ulitin po natin, ha? Rewind. If for females, oocytes start out as oogonia, for males, ano naman po yung starter ng sperm cells? It's the germ cells. Okay? But again, for females, they start out as oogonia. So, while males only start producing sperm cells during puberty, females are already born with all of their oogonia, as we can see right here on the second bullet. For female humans, although they're already born with all of their oogonia, here's the step that only happens when puberty starts. Okay, ulitin po natin, although female humans, pinanganak na sila na nandoon na sa kanila lahat ng oogonia nila, meron pong isang step na magsisimula lang din kapag nagsimula na yung puberty nitong female human person na to. So during puberty, the follicle-stimulating hormone would stimulate some of the follicles to begin developing during each menstrual cycle. So ulitin po natin, female humans are born with all their oogonia already present, but they're not yet functional. Wala pa po silang pakinabang. So once the person gets to puberty, that's only when the follicle-stimulating hormone would start activating some of those oogonia to become an oocyte every time the person goes through their menstrual cycle. During the time of ovulation, oocytes are moved into the uterine tubes by the action of the fimbriae. Once they're in the uterine tube, they're alive for about 24 hours. And if no sperm cell meets them, the oocyte would die. Okay, ulitin po natin yung statement na yun, no? During the time of ovulation, yung mga oocytes po, lalabas na sila, no? Pupunta sila sa uterine tubes, and they are moved there, no? By the action of the fimbriae on the surface of the cells within the uterine tubes, or sa opening ng uterine tubes. So, kapag po implanted na sila dun sa uterine tube, no, they would stay there for about 24 hours. Now, kung wala pong sperm cell na magmi-meet sa kanila dun, then eventually that oocyte would die after 24 hours. The uterine tubes are also known as the Fallopian tubes. The fallopian tubes are part of the uterus which extends towards the ovaries. And this is where the oocytes go during the time of ovulation. Okay, so yun nabanggit natin kanina, yung pag-move ng mga oocytes papunta sa uterine tube, yun din po yung fallopian tube. So it's the same place, just different terminologies. So again, they stay there during the time of ovulation for up to 24 hours. Right here, we have the term fimbriae. So fimbriae are fringe-looking structures located at the opening of the fallopian tubes that move the oocytes in a sweeping motion so that they successfully enter the uterine tubes. Fertilization usually happens at the part of the fallopian tube that's near the ovaries, which is called the ampulla. This is also the specific part of the fallopian tube that would be tied during a procedure called tubal ligation, which is a form of sterilization for females. Another recall time, if for females, this process is called tubal ligation. Ano naman po ang version nito for males? It's vasectomy. Okay, so again, for males, it's called vasectomy, and the specific part that they cut is the ductus deferens or vas deferens. But for females, it's called tubal ligation, and the specific part that they tie is the fallopian tube. The uterus is a pear-shaped structure. Again, Americans using anything but the metric system. Sorry. Again, the uterus is a pear-shaped structure that's also located in the pelvic cavity. Its functions include receiving and providing nourishment for the fertilized oocyte, and this is also where the embryo would stay and develop. Okay, so ulitin po natin yung sequence of events na yun. All female humans are born with their oogonia already present. During puberty, the follicle-stimulating hormone would now activate some of the oogonia to become oocytes every time the menstrual cycle begins. Next, with the help of the fimbriae at the opening of the uterine tubes, one oocyte would be moved to the ampulla. Yung ampulla, that's still a part of the uterine tube. After that, no, dun sa ampulla, that is where fertilization should happen. So the oocyte would live there for 24 hours until a sperm cell would meet it. Now, if no sperm cell meets the oocyte, it dies. But if, for example, a sperm cell does come in contact and fertilizes the oocyte, this fertilized oocyte would now move to the uterus. Now, the uterus is divided into three parts. The ones that is closest to the uterine tubes is the fundus. The largest segment is the body, and the narrow region that leads to the vagina is the cervix. Let's now look into the layers of the uterine walls. The serous layer is called the perimetrium, which is the outermost layer. The muscular layer is the myometrium, which is found in the middle, and it is composed of smooth muscle. The innermost layer is called the endometrium, and this is also the layer that is discarded during menstruation. The vagina extends from the uterus and has an opening to the outside of the body. During intercourse, this is where the penis would enter. The vagina is also where menstruation would flow out of, and during childbirth, this is also where the baby would exit. The vagina has very muscular walls and a mucous membrane. The vagina naturally has an acidic pH, which could kill infectious bacteria. The vulva is an external female sex organ which includes all of these structures here. So let's go through them one by one. The mons pubis is a fatty layer of skin. The labia majora is the larger outer folds of the skin surrounding the entrance of the vagina. In males, the equivalent of this would be the scrotum. The labia minora are much thinner folds of skin on the inside of the labia majora, which also surrounds the entrance to the vagina. The clitoris is a small erectile structure that for males is equivalent to the penis. So let's repeat that. For females, they also have an erectile structure referred to as the clitoris, which in males, their erectile structure would be referred to as the penis. This illustration shows all the external structures that we've previously discussed. Let's now discuss the mammary glands. The mammary glands are located in the breast, and this is the organ that's responsible for milk production. Recall time, if you watch our discussion on the endocrine system, ano naman po yung hormone responsible for milk production? Prolactin. This illustration shows us the anatomy of the breast. In female humans, puberty begins when they're at 11 to 13 years old and is complete as early as the age of 16. Menarche is a term that refers to the first ever episode of menstrual bleeding. During female puberty, increased levels of estrogen and progesterone are secreted by the ovaries. Okay, ulitin po natin ang estrogen and progesterone. These come from the ovaries and they increase in levels during puberty. Same with males. For females, the gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH, is also produced in the hypothalamus and would also stimulate the production of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. Ulitin po natin, for both males and females, parehas po na nagpo-produce yung hypothalamus ng GnRH and parehas lang din po na ine-encourage ng GnRH yung production ng LH and FSH. Then, LH and FSH, parehas lang din po itong manggagaling sa anterior pituitary. But of course, since males and females have anatomical differences, magkaiba na po ang target organs ng mga hormones na to. For females, the luteinizing hormone would start up the process of ovulation, and the follicle-stimulating hormone would help the follicles to begin development. Estrogen is the hormone necessary for the proliferation of endometrial cells. Estrogen is also responsible for the development of mammary glands, which subsequently leads to the growth of breast size. Estrogen also has the capability to control FSH and LH secretion. Progesterone is responsible for the enlargement of endometrial cells and is important in the maintenance of pregnancy state. Just like estrogen, progesterone is also needed for the proper development of the mammary glands. Although, in comparison to estrogen, ang estrogen po, FSH and LH lang ang kayang kontrolin. Pero, ang progesterone po, kaya niyang kontrolin yung secretion ng FSH, LH, and also estrogen. So, progesterone can control all three of them. The menstrual cycle is a series of changes that occur in sexually mature but non-pregnant females. And some people might think when they hear menstrual cycle that this only refers to the time where the person is bleeding during their monthly period. But the menstrual cycle actually refers to a whole entire process or whole entire cycle. And menstruation is just one part of that cycle. So menses, this is the specific time in the menstrual cycle when the endometrium is shed or dislodged from the uterus. On average, this happens after 28 days of the menstrual cycle. During the 1st to 5th day of the menstrual cycle, this is the time when the endometrium is being shed, so bleeding is observed. So at this time, both estrogen and progesterone levels are low. Okay, ulitin po natin yun. During the menstrual cycle, no, yung day 1 hanggang day 5, yun po yung menses. So dito po yung time where the endometrium is being discarded, so bleeding would be observed. And during day 1 to 5, no, mababa lang po yung levels ng estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so huwag pong kakalimutan yun. As the endometrium is being shed, both estrogen and progesterone levels are low. Next, from day 6 to 13, this is referred to as the proliferative stage. tapos na pong ma-shed yung lumang endometrium. So the body is now rebuilding the endometrium. Progesterone levels are still low. Mababa pa rin po yung progesterone, but estrogen levels are now increasing during the proliferative stage. Day 14 is the ovulation stage. The luteinizing hormone causes the oocyte to be released from the ovaries. And again, because of the sweeping motion of the fimbriae, this oocyte would now move to the fallopian tubes. Now, during this time, estrogen levels are already high, but progesterone levels are just starting to increase. Okay, ulitin po natin, sa ovulation, no, sa day 14, ovulation stage, ito po yung point na aalis na yung oocyte galing dun sa ovaries, nililipat na siya papunta sa fallopian tube. Now, during that time, mataas na yung estrogen levels, pero umaangat pa lang yung progesterone. At day 15 to 28, this would be the secretory stage, which is basically just time in between ovulation and then the next menses. All right, so at this time, the endometrium is again ready for implantation. So during the secretory stage, bumababa na po ulit yung estrogen, while the progesterone levels are still high. So again, if no fertilization happens, repeat cycle po, and we would restart at day 1 to 5 of menstruation. This slide shows us an illustration of the entire cycle that we've just discussed. Kasama na rin po yung graph showing a visual representation of the levels of both estrogen and progesterone. Menopause is the time when the ovaries now secrete much less hormones and the number of follicles in the ovaries are low. So during menopause, it is expected that the menstrual cycle and ovulation now becomes more irregular. So hindi na po nasusunod yung 28-day cycle na napag-usapan natin kanina kung nasa menopause time na po ang isang female person. Contraception refers to the methods that are supposed to prevent pregnancy. Listed here are the 6 main types, which includes long-acting reversible contraception, barrier methods. Sterilization involves the surgical methods such as tubal ligation for females and vasectomy for males. Ulitin po natin sa tubal ligation, ano yung specific location that would be tied for females. It's the fallopian tubes. In cases of vasectomy, ano po yung specific structure that would be cut? It's the vas deferens, right? Next are hormonal methods. So hormonal methods involve the intake of contraceptive pills. Next, fertility awareness involves simply counting and monitoring a person's 28-day cycle and seeing which stage of the menstrual cycle they're currently at. Emergency contraception involves the intake of those pills that are commercially referred to as Plan B or the morning after pills. Other methods mentioned here are long-acting reversible contraception and barrier methods. That ends our discussion on the male and female reproductive system. This has been Aurel Enriquez. Thank you so much for watching.